Welcome to Warriors Watch. I'm Danny Leroux, your host, and so excited to be here for the first episode of this new venture. And basically, since the finals last year and finishing my part in Locked On Warriors, people have been asking me if I'm going to podcast this year, and if so, how it's going to work. And the answer is, yes, I am, and it's going to be this. And I was thinking for a little while about how I wanted to tackle it this year, because 5 times a week was definitely too much for me with my other obligations and everything else. But I did want to do Warriors podcasting. I love doing it. And fortunately, CLNS Media, who I do Real Jam Radio through, reached out with basically giving me the support to say, hey, whatever you want to do, we will support it. And I have fully embraced that idea to have the idea of something that's really, really different. So what it's going to be depends on the week, depends on the situation. So certain episodes are going to be a game recap. If the Warriors have a big game, if they have an exciting game, I'm planning on doing a Warriors Watch wrap-up of it. You can check that out. I'll have guests on. Maybe it'll be a solo breakdown, whatever works for that. Then if there's an interview, if there's a pod I want to do, I will do that as well. If there is a segment that as a solo project, I want to catch up on something that I've been thinking about, or I wrote a piece and I want to flesh it out, I'll be doing that too. It's going to be a little bit of everything. That also makes your input very important for those of you who make it to the end of the episode. I'll give you how to do feedback. For those of you who know my work, you know where it's going to be. This episode is a great encapsulation of that, of what I want to do. So after this little introduction, I have Anthony Slater of The Athletic on to talk about the Warriors' China trip, both on and off the court. And then I wanted to do a little bit on the Vegas odds for this team, not only over-under, but championship, MVP, and everything really of that nature. So there's a little bit of interview, a little bit of solo, and it's really fun. This episode is actually brought to you by Greats, which is a Real Jam Radio sponsor that I'm thrilled to have on. They do wonderful shoes. And so you go to greats.com and then you enter the Real GM promo code from Real Jam Radio and you get 15% off your first order. So you can check them out, but supporting them here as well. And this is going to be a blast. It's going to be really fun to go in different directions. I realize that some of you will not be familiar with me. Welcome. I'm Danny Leroux. I cover the Warriors, have since 2009. Presently with The Athletic, my work appears all over, otherwise, salary cap stuff, and everything else, really. Do the Dunked On Basketball podcast with Nate Duncan, Real Jam Radio, and then I did Locked On Warriors last year. I also wrote a book, 100 Things Warriors Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die, which will be released on November 1st. Some people are getting it ahead of time. And I'll talk about that as well here. That'll be something, there are stories and things like that I want to incorporate. And I've been holding back on a lot of the stuff that I learned making the book because I was, waiting for it to come out and for people to enjoy it. I don't like spoilers. So that is the show for right now. The beginning part of this is with Anthony Slater of The Athletic about the Warriors' China trip. Going to go in a lot of different directions, and I hope you really enjoy it. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, no problem, Danny.
You wrote a really good piece for The Athletic. I think it came out on Monday night, and it focused more, because you'd already written about the games themselves, on the experience of this China trip. And it just sounds, just from the perspective, especially of somebody who's never done it before, like I haven't and like you hadn't before this trip, that it was just eye-opening and really, really different from what you've experienced.
Yeah, I mean, you expected it going in. I did. But you just don't know until you've been through it. And, we were kind of fortunate enough to ride on the same plane because just the logistics of everything were just so complicated. There were so many people going. The team ended up bringing 160, I think was the final tally of passengers. Tons of people, minority owners, dancers. I mean, the NBA kind of just wanted to send the whole franchise in a sense so they could simulate an NBA game in China. And because of that, it really kind of pushed us into a behind-the-scenes type situation where we're showing up with the players, we're riding the buses to the hotels with the players, and in Shenzhen, I'm walking out of the airport after we get through customs, right next to Draymond. Durant's maybe 25 feet in front of us, and you're walking through their eyes into these crowds, and it's not like it's something we haven't done all season. We walk through the tunnels with players sometimes at arenas, and you obviously see the fanfare, but to see it just halfway across the world as you're experiencing this new thing, and to just see how monstrous these guys are. I walked out in Shanghai with Steph Curry, and just the looks on people's faces when they were walking out, and obviously it was a bunch of, Chinese people who most of them don't even really know the language, but they're just yelling these guys' names. And it was, the fanfare was the craziest part. And then, obviously the cultural difference over there, and the cities, particularly Shanghai, was just unbelievable. I mean, it's the biggest city in the world. New York City, which is probably the biggest I'd been in previously, is 24th, I think. City proper's 8 million, and Shanghai's 24 million.
Yeah, I mean, the last estimate that I saw for the Bay Area as a whole, though defining it can be complicated, is about 7 million. So if you think about that, in the city itself, Shanghai is more than 3 times bigger. And then if you count the metro area, it's closer to 5 times.
Yeah, it's stunning. I mean, the downtown is huge with these monster buildings. One's the second highest building in the world, and honestly, there's a building next to the Shanghai Tower, which you could put it in any U.S. city, and I think it would be the biggest one. But it looks, I wouldn't say small, but it's pretty dwarfed by the Shanghai Tower. And this is this monstrous downtown, but it's so much more than that, where you look around and it's just like downtowns basically everywhere that aren't downtowns. That you're like, yeah, that thing right over there is bigger than Milwaukee, and it's like the 9th biggest downtown over, in this area. And obviously it's huge, but it's also densely populated, with just people coming around everywhere. And the taxi situation was just unique because a lot of my experience was, it wasn't normal for somebody that's just, hey, I'm going to go be a tourist over there and travel, because it was the NBA, and we're riding buses from airports, and there's so much security and stuff catered for us basically. But when I needed to taxi across Shanghai, taxi to an event from my own hotel, because I didn't stay at the team hotel, that's when you kind of really got the full experience. Got into these cities where, you really kind of saw what, there's a lot of impoverished parts of these cities for sure. And also the taxi drivers don't speak any English at all. And, I think Google Translate ended up being just a blessing, where you'd have to sit there, you'd have to find the address. Obviously, there was phone issues with data and stuff like that. And, they got so many websites over in China blocked, so you have to have a VPN. Twitter's blocked, Google's blocked, Facebook. And then you have to get up these websites in American, but they can't read it in English. So you have to get it translated to Mandarin. You can't read it, but you just show it, and you're hoping what you have up is translated properly. And then, they're off to try to find the place. We had a few mix-ups doing that. So it was definitely wild.
Yeah, and I think you have the kind of the combination also of factors with these Chinese games of the rarity. I mean, granted, players are going there so much more in the offseason now, but the rarity of actually seeing kind of NBA action or a reasonable facsimile of it, and China just being incredibly devout NBA fans at this point. And there are a lot of different factors. I watched part of Silver's press conference kind of talking about this. And yeah, you saw that in a lot of different ways, both that crazy Shanghai practice where nothing really happened, but they still packed the arena and were cheering the whole time. And also the stuff, outside the hotels and everything like that.
Yeah. I mean, look, if these guys were just somewhere, then there's tons of people there. Draymond did a little event at a New Era store in a mall. And it was fresh off flying late night the night before. And you could tell he was tired. He kind of just showed up. He was there for probably 30 minutes. And he was doing, like, they were calling out media members to come up and get their pictures taken, which is obviously something, as you know, that would never happen in the U.S. They just start calling us up to, get autographs and pictures taken, and the crowds just flocked there. There were, I'd say, on average, if they were leaving for practice at 11 a.m. from their hotel, the Ritz in Shanghai, there were probably 200 people there, 100 on each side, going crazy at the sight of any of these guys. But there was a group of about 20 of them, and me and Sam Amick talked to them at one point at about 2:30 a.m. that did not leave for 3 days. I mean, they were sleeping there, and it was all just because, they wanted these 3 to 4 second, the guy gets out of the car, whoever it is, Steph, Kevin, and they could just get up and yell and, maybe get an autograph. But it was mainly just to see these guys for brief seconds of the day for 3 straight days. These guys camped out they were camping out for, tickets to something. I mean, maybe that's the comparison in the U.S. with, if people camp out for college games. But just a bunch of stuff like that. it was cool. And it's almost wild to me because I just think about there's not an international event, I don't think, that any international team in any sport could come to the U.S. I know like soccer teams, big soccer teams come here and play in arenas, and we pack stadiums for if it's Manchester United against Chelsea or something in Miami, but it's still not like there's not that obsession for the stars. I mean, it's a cool event to go to, but I just cannot believe their popularity over there.
And it reminded me of something that strikes me periodically as a reminder of kind of what we do is different from other people's lives, of like when I'm walking to the tunnel and all that, and somebody goes, "Oh my God, Steph Curry just walked by me." And I just go, "Yeah, I've been covering him since 2009. I've talked with him, so many times as you have." And it's just like that idea, but then you amplify it by the possibility that it's like the only time you're going to get that opportunity. Like that's what makes the China stuff really different, is that it is a rarity, and it will always be, because the NBA, as far as I can think of, unless they do like an offshoot league, is not going to have a league there, and that means the best players are, it'll be those kind of appearances, and they're wonderful. I think it's great to grow the brand, get people excited about the sport. They're already really excited. They have been for years now, and so those opportunities, like it is good to get the perspective of these people who live for this but don't get the access or the opportunities.
Yeah, and they're, we talk about them kind of being superheroes to a lot of these people where they don't really know them as humans. It's amplified there. I mean, because these are people that really in their minds are, in America, there's a lot of these people that will barely ever see Steph Curry in person, but over there, it's like the thought of it is just out of this realm for them. So the fact that he is sitting there in their city kind of bumps it up. And I think there's, maybe I'm wrong, but I think there's more of a celebrity obsession over there, because they were having some events where there was even some Chinese celebrities clearly that were there. I'd never heard of them, but just talking to people around there, they were involving Chinese celebrities, and they were going crazy for those people too. So I think there's some of that to it. But you're right in the sense of when we're walking on the tunnels and they go crazy, it's always such a interesting thing to me when you walk out of a calm situation where they're really humanized, where we're walking off a plane the first time, and Draymond sitting there talking about he just watched Power, the season finale of Power, and what happened there. I've seen the show before, and me and a couple people are sitting there talking to him about that, joking around. I mean, as human as you can get, you're just sitting, doing that, and then suddenly pop, you're in this crowd of people that are just like bowing to him basically, and it's like, oh yeah, you just kind of forget about it for a second. It's a little crazy.
So let's talk a little bit about what happened on the court. And their exhibition games, I very rarely read too much into it, but I think the biggest takeaway from both games combined, Shenzhen and Shanghai, was Stephen Curry's explosion in the Shanghai game, because that was a reminder of just what he can do when he's close to right, and it looks like he's physically there right now. He
looks really good right now. I mean, it is preseason, but the moves are so crisp, fluid. He came back just, I think, in great shape. I'm not going to predict him to win the MVP this season, but he, to me, looks as fresh as he did at any point last year, even in his best stretches. So it's a good sign. It's nothing to read too deeply into it. We knew he was going to be really good this season. He's going to be really good. But all four stars look like they, returned in good shape and healthy. I'd say the biggest takeaway through 3 games to me is probably like Nick Young looks like he's, questionably in the rotation at this point because of comes in out of shape. Now he's hurt, behind when he's on the court. The stars that aren't the story to me. It's just that, I'd probably see Caspi in the rotation ahead of Young at this point.
Which is funny because that's something that I would have advocated for in the abstract, just because Caspi is such a perfect fit for what the Warriors do. Like he defensively, he's not amazing, but he's versatile in a way that they can use. And then offensively, he makes the right decisions. He has incredible range on his jump shot. And something else that I've been encouraged by is the other. So you talk about the players who could and arguably should be above Nick Young in the rotation is Patrick McCaw. And McCaw, I think he hasn't been amazing in these games, but I'm just happy to see him get the opportunity because, again, a guy that I actually think fits in better with some of the Warriors' starter-heavy units than some of their backup units because he is more of a complementary player. He can fight defensively and hit open shots when they come, but he doesn't have to have the ball in his hands all the time or take a ton of shots.
Yeah, so, I mean, Steve Kerr's kind of been running a preseason-like rotation in the second halves and playing a ton of guys and closing with the, training camp invitees. But in the first half, it seems in pretty much all 3 games, he's run a pretty typical regular season-like rotation. And McCaw's entered right around about the 4-minute mark of the first quarter in all 3 games, which signals to me, look, this guy is going to be an every night rotation player who gets in probably at some point mid to late first quarter or mid to late third quarter and gets himself 18 to 20 minutes. I don't think he's scored in either China game, but doesn't really matter. He'll get his pick and choose his spots, get a cut here and there, maybe get an open 3, especially if he's playing with the Stars. And I'm with you. I think he needs to play a lot this season. And, you mentioned Caspi being such a good fit for how these Warriors play. I think we saw last year how much of a fit McCaw's game is, the way he can move and pass when he needs to and score off the ball. They need his aggression to be there. And, maybe that was a little bit of an issue in China where, he's not scoring because he's not really shooting. But his progression is to the point where he has got to be higher on the pecking order than Nick Young and some of the other wings.
Over the last year or so, it's been a lot of discussion and questioning about where McCaw kind of fits in. And while he gets comparisons to Iguodala for kind of good reasons, some of what they do well is similar. In terms of role, what I've seen for him is actually that he's the heir apparent to Sean Livingston with how Kerr uses Livingston. So Livingston is nominally the Warriors' backup point guard, but Livingston plays a vast majority of his competitive minutes with Steph Curry. And I think that that's the role eventually, probably not this year, but maybe next year, and you can talk about the contract implications of that. McCaw probably slides in there more easily than that spot in the second unit, because if you're playing him next to Curry and often Durant, he can do exactly what he needs to do. He can be the ball hawk defensively, and then offensively, cuts, make shots when they're there.
Yeah, Steve Kerr has called him the team's third point guard. They kind of have like 9 third point guards when you think about Draymond ball handles. Durant does, Iguodala, Livingston, as you mentioned. But McCaw is versatile. He could play 1, 2, 3. Can't obviously play 4 or a bigger type wing, but he's important to their team. Where are you at on their chances of retaining him? I mean, obviously, if they want him back, they can bring him back. You would think, hey, championship winner, versatile guy, two-way player in this day and age. Well, he'll get a nice contract come restricted free agency. But also, I know the market's so down. I mean, you're probably more in tune with this than me. But it'll depend on the season he has. But do you think he's gonna command something big that they're going to be thinking twice about in free agency?
So I think the most likely scenario is that it doesn't happen. The number of suitors is probably the best way to put it. The number of teams that are going to have space is so low. And then remember that with his contract, so he's going to be what's called arenas limited, which means that a team can't offer him more than the mid-level exception, the big mid-level, not the smaller one, the big mid-level. And while another team could offer that and then spike it in future years, they would have to have the cap space to do that, because you can't just start at the mid-level exception if that's all you have and then spike it to 15 million or whatever. You can't do that. And then the other thing that the Warriors really benefit from, and this is something that Miami's going to be screwed by, is that even if they got a contract like that, teams now, if they match a contract that follows the arenas limitations, they have the option of counting it on the books at an even number for each season, which would be great for the Warriors because, that first year is going to be before Klay Thompson gets a huge raise, before Draymond Green gets a huge raise, so they can make it less expensive for them. It'll still be expensive if it happens. But I think that the other big factor here is not only are there very few teams that are going to have space, but there are a lot of shooting guards on this market. Danny Green's probably going to be out there, Avery Bradley, KCP, Gary Harris just re-signed, but then also remember that some of these teams, like the Bulls, they have Zach LaVine. They're not going to be spending a ton of money on Pat McCaw to do that. Atlanta has Kent Bazemore. While Bazemore, how he fits in the rotation, long term for them is a question. That's a lot of money to tie up in two guards. So I don't think there's going to be that much of a market. My ballpark is that he'll get something around the mid-level. And if that's where it is, I think the Warriors will happily match it.
Yeah, and that's what's kind of what, I don't want to say confuses me, but the Sean Livingston re-signing, they gave him about $8 million a year, which is, near what the mid-level is. I kind of thought that money was bookmarked for McCaw. But, I think they brought Livingston back because the veteran said, hey, especially Durant, hey, I'm going to pitch this amount of money back, go bring back Livingston and Iguodala. But to me, it would have been wiser if, locker room, etiquette or whatever you want aside, locker room chemistry aside, they just kind of let Livingston go elsewhere and bookmark that money from McCaw. But at this point, they may have both of them. They may have all of them going in the future, and they may just be paying this massive tax bill and being okay with it because they're going to make outrageous amounts of money in San Francisco.
Yeah, I think they just want to keep the players happy. And one alternative with the way they structured this contract, because it's only partially guaranteed in the last year, is that if McCaw has shown that he's the heir apparent to that spot, they could either A, trade Livingston after this season, or B, just stretch him. And so if you stretch him because of that partial guarantee, you stretch that combination of money, I think it's probably about $12 million, over 5 years. And so that, that does add to the tax bill. It counts for all that, but it wouldn't be heinous in that way. So I don't think they're going to stretch him. I think that if they wanted to trade him, especially on basically a 1-year contract at that point, somebody would be interested, especially because we're going to start seeing more trade exceptions come into the league now because so many teams don't have cap space. So it'd be possible. And at that point, really, I think what you want to do is you want to make Durant and everybody happy. And then maybe by that point, they'll be like, okay, it's that McCaw's the guy now. And so while they like Sean Livingston a lot personally, as you know, and we could talk about that, but we don't need to, that I think it'll all work itself out. It could lead to one expensive year. I think that's kind of, if you want to think about it, quote unquote, the worst case scenario if McCaw develops. But even that would be tolerable. Yeah.
I think that a stretch is unlikely unless Livingston really, really declines, because I don't think these owners or this franchise at all wants to be viewed as they cheaped out on these guys in this era at all, and stretching it and trying to just, basically giving him away for nothing, and just to save a little, few tax money dollars. I don't think they're ever going to want that optic out there. So
that's true. I could see, and they always have guys that are going to hit free agency. So you want to keep everybody happy basically all the time, because while Durant's going to be a free agent next summer, then Clay will be extension eligible next summer, and then he could sign after that. So you want all these guys to be happy because they do that. And if it's just money, and if they're making as much at the Chase Center as we think they will, they can deal with that.
Yeah, no doubt.
So last thing I want to ask you, because the part of this after we're going to talk, I'm going to go through over-unders and other odds. It's just you and I haven't discussed 67.5, whether you think they're going to go over-under and how likely you think that is.
I'd say 67. I think it's a really good line. I'm going to go under by a half. They're going to rest a lot. Any minor injury is going to be like, all right, well, you're sitting, basically. If it's an ankle tweak, it'll be probably 2 games of just resting until it's fine. They won 67 last year, which is a massive, massive number in the NBA. And I know I'm sitting here saying under, but as long as they don't have the clutch time numbers that they had 2 years ago when they won 73 games, they were a better net rating team last year, as you know, than they were in the 73 win team. They just did not have the clutch time numbers that were so wild. So I'm just assuming they're going to have relatively normal, stable clutch numbers like they did last season, which means they're going to lose a few games down the stretch. They're going to probably lose 2 games of the last 5 when they're just sitting because they already have the 1 seed. My guess is 67-15 again, because look, they've done it 2 out of the last 3 years, so it seems like a pretty, guessable number for them.
That's a good number. I'll go through my thoughts a little bit later, but the one thing that I want to mention that you kind of touched on this is the idea of being really patient with injuries. That is the variable here as well. So I think they have, like, on a talent perspective, they're going to win more games than this. The idea that they just let it go, especially if nobody's pushing them to get close to 67, 68, then it's like, well, what are we going after? So the question basically is, are they so good that even if they don't have their foot on the gas pedal, will they still win a lot of games? And the answer to that could very well be yes.
Yeah, there's going to be fewer, big resting games just because the NBA spaced out the schedule so much. And Steve Kerr called for it, and the NBA kind of delivered. So I feel like they know that they can't rest three guys in one game together on the road. Like, obviously Adam Silver has said he's going to penalize teams for that. And so there may be I think there's going to be a lot of games where it's like, well, Klay Thompson misses a game in Orlando, and then Steph misses one in Philadelphia. But this team is going to be still heavily favored if it's just one of their main guys being out against a fringe playoff team. So even though that I think they will rest a lot, I still think they're going to win a lot of these games that they do rest. So maybe they push 70. I mean, if I'm sitting here saying they're going to win 67 games, that already is kind of pushing 70. So it'll be interesting to see the first 2 months. And if they get out to some kind of crazy record, then maybe we can talk, are they going to accidentally fall into a race for their own wins record? But if they lose, 4 games in the first 18, then I think they're just going to kind of cruise to mid-60s.
That's certainly fair. The last thing, since I won't have you on before the season starts, because the season starts a week from today, is just if there anything that you're watching as we head into the start of the season that maybe you think hasn't been discussed enough, which is almost impossible with this team?
Yeah, right. Jordan Bell intrigues me as this can he push for minutes guy, because I think he's been really impressive in 3 preseason games, which is when we're talking right now. As a passer, as a finisher, as a smart offensive player. We already know what he is defensively, which I think projects to be a high upside, like small ball, switch heavy big man. Like, he isn't ever going to be Draymond Green, but he just has that like defensive end feet for a big guy, kind of like Big Baby, except he's not overweight. He looks like a linebacker D end out there, because that's what he used to play in high school. And the fact that he has not been lost offensively, I actually think he's been impressive offensively. It's going to be hard for Steve Kerr to keep him off the floor. How much Steve Kerr loved James Michael McAdoo. To me, he's just a lot better James Michael McAdoo. They can really pass. So you're sitting there going, well, he's going to have to find minutes somewhere. But at the same time, what have either of these 3 veterans ahead of him done to lose any minutes? They love starting Zaza Pachulia. They, like the JaVale McGee. The entire team loves when JaVale McGee gets his spurts. And David West is such an important piece of that second unit as kind of a passer. So I'm not sure where Jordan Bell gets minutes, but I'm not sure how you keep Jordan Bell off the floor. Maybe the answer is they don't do much Draymond small ball center, because, look, you don't really have to bust that out if you're winning pretty much every game. I'm thinking in the first half of a lot of games, they go 4 centers, never play Draymond at the center until late in the game if they have to.
Good to get a James Michael McAdoo reference in the first episode of Warriors Watch. And my point with my thing to watch is very similar to that, which is how many guys 25 and younger not are a part of the rotation this year, but look like they're going to be a part of it next year, because the Warriors are going to have opportunities. All 3 of the main centers are going to be free agents again. And then we talked about the Livingston part of this, and then really who steps up. And so I think Bell and McCaw are the leaders for that, but who knows? Maybe Damian Jones can really show something over the course of this year. And if the Warriors are only looking for 1, maybe 2 centers as opposed to 3 next year, then the team A gets a lot cheaper, which is good for ownership and everything like that. But B, I think that infusion could really help them long term, just because they can retain those guys and they can work with them and really mold, because they haven't done in the current era, they haven't done a lot of molding. It's more like of young players. It's been more just maximizing the guys they already had and the new guys they brought in.
Yeah, I'm a little bit skeptical on Jones at this point.
So much
through a year and 3 preseason games, and Looney, I'm very skeptical they're even going to pick up his option. Maybe I think they'll pick up Damian Jones' option, because he's still kind of got an intriguing upside, and that's only year 3, not year 4. But I think Bell looks like he's going to be a player for a long time in this league. The other 2, I'm not sure how long they'll last in the league.
Yeah, and the other thing is that, especially if Looney, if they don't see him as a 5, then he doesn't really have a place on this team long term. Like, the Warriors don't need another 4, and they probably never will. So, if you think that he could and he's 1 year away from being expensive, if theoretically, if he does deliver, he's not going to be the starter, because they have Draymond Green, and they, those backup minutes can go in a lot of different directions. So, I think that's a good point, and it's definitely something to look forward to. But I've already taken more of your time than I said I was going to. So thank you so much for coming on, and really looking forward to your work this year. Yeah, same to you. Should be fun, and it is starting quicker than I ever imagined. thanks again to Anthony Slater for taking the time to come on and tell us about the China trip. And before we move on, I want to tell you about Greats. Greats is a Brooklyn's first shoe company, and they have a lot of really interesting classic styles made the best for less. So the ones that I have are the Royales that are the Nero color, so it's a dark with the light frame, and they're really striking. I think they're really cool looking shoes, and I'm somebody who did not grow up a sneakerhead mostly because I didn't have the money for it, because at that time there weren't really any entrants into the market other than for the high-end stuff, other than the ones that are there, and they're still there for the most part. But I love that there are these companies now that are going for really high-end products, and I've been wearing them around for the last couple weeks and been very, very impressed with it. And they have a wide variety of style for both men and women, so you should be able to find something you like. And you can go to greats.com, greats.com, and you enter the RealGM promo code, because they're sponsoring that show, but I'm doing this to kind of support them. RealGM, and you get 15% off at checkout, so it's pretty awesome. You can definitely check out everything they have, and I have some friends who, when I told them they were sponsored, they were very happy because they have a couple pairs already themselves. So greats.com, RealGM promo code, 15% off, free returns, free exchanges. Greats. Classic, stylish, comfortable sneakers sold at a great price. So what I want to do for the last little part of this is talk a little bit about some of the lines that are out there for those of you who choose to invest money in this, and obviously hopefully that is legal where you are, but I find them an interesting intellectual exercise, and if you want to hear the fully fleshed out version of a lot of the rest of the league and everything else, you can listen to Podcast to Do with Nate Duncan, Podcast to Do with Arturo Galletti for Real Jam Radio. Both of those have plenty of thoughts on the rest of the league, but for the Warriors, they're a compelling case just because their lines are so different than everybody else because they are such heavy favorites. And so the place to start is with the over-under. Line is still at 67.5. And the way that I feel about this is I think they're more likely than not to break that. I think they're more than likely to get 68, 69, something in that range. But the fundamental problem is that 68 is a lot of wins to get. And they could have an excellent season. They could still have the number one record in the entire league by a ways and still get 67 or fewer. So I think that it's not the best bet on the board. However, I would not begrudge those that chose the over. Choosing the under seems like a little bit of a weird bet, especially because most people listening to this probably support the Warriors. If you're that kind of hedger, sure, maybe you can hedge that way, but I think there are other ways to do it. So over under is... It's a fine use of it, but it's not my personal favorite. I also then, kind of along those lines, would not do the conference odds on the same logic that basically you can get significantly better odds for the Warriors winning the title than winning the conference. And my feeling is that if the Warriors make it to the NBA Finals, they're overwhelming favorites to win, because the same factors that would cause them to lose the finals, most likely an injury or something like that, would likely cause them to lose in the conference finals, unless the injury occurred so late in the conference finals that they basically already had it. So basically the odds that I'm seeing of getting, the Warriors winning the championship, it's a little bit over 50%, so basically a little bit over 1-2. And I think that's pretty good, actually, for the Warriors. I mean, you would love to get it at 1-1, because then, that's basically, that would be a really good set of odds, but the Warriors have a better chance than that. So at about 1-2, depending on where you see it, you can get a little bit better than that. I think that's a very reasonable bet. I think that the Warriors are significant favorites to win it this year. While there are different competitors this year, I think that Cleveland is going to have to figure a lot of this out. And then Oklahoma City, Houston, and presumably San Antonio, compared to where San Antonio was for most of the series that they had last year in the Western Conference Finals, those teams are all better, but the Warriors are probably going to face one, maybe two of those teams, and you have to deal with full strength, and I believe that Golden State is better than those teams. So, to me, of the team-wide bets, the title odds, I think, are the best, just because that is more on talent and on execution than the win total, which, that could just be Kerr choosing to rest guys or whatever else. The other thing to consider why you might be a little bit more comfortable playing the over is the change in schedule. So I'll probably talk about this on Warriors Watch, but the change in the schedule to basically add a week to a week and a half without removing any games, the real intent of that was to spread things out a little bit more. And the fewer back-to-backs a team has, the less likely it is that they're going to do tactical rest, because really that's what it's about, is not that avoiding the cumulative strain. It will still happen. There will still be guys on the Warriors and on other teams that get rest in that sort of a way, even without back-to-backs. It's just the way it works. But there should be less of it. And that also means that the Warriors will be closer to full stamina when they're playing teams game to game, and so that makes it less likely that they're going to have those just flat nights. They still will. Everybody does. But that does certainly help it. And since I don't think there's a good Rookie of the Year candidate in the Warriors, I'm not going to spend any time on that. But the last one I want to talk about is MVP. And I'm sure there are a fair amount of people that are looking at the Durant odds. You can see those around, about 11-2 is the best that I'm seeing. Then, so that's, 5.5 to 1. That's not bad. I think that there is a real chance that Durant is just the best player in the league, and people have been like, oh, well, they're going to split credit being Durant and Curry. That's completely true as a possibility, but remember that best player on best team is oftentimes a good thing there. And if the Warriors, let's say they go over this number, there's a pretty solid chance they're going to be 8 to 10 games clear of the entire league. And so if you're that way and it's clear that Durant is their best player, then there's a case for MVP. So I think that one's not bad. I think that's, if you're a stronger believer in it than I am, you could justify putting some money on that. The one that I think is far better is Stephen Curry. So Stephen Curry, you could see it anywhere from about 14 to 1 to 18 to 1. And to me, the logic here of with Curry is you don't focus on his 15-16 unanimous MVP season. Focus on his 14-15 comfortable, but still, was dicey to the last couple weeks of the year, MVP season. And if he has that exact year, he has a very good shot of winning the MVP because he was remarkably efficient offensively. Maybe his usage drops a little bit from that just because they have Kevin Durant instead of Harrison Barnes, but he can have that sort of a season again. He looked phenomenal in the game in Shanghai, and the offensive part of it is there. His defense is, it's fine. It hasn't taken a step back at this point. And that protects against, or there hedges on a couple of different things. One, if Durant misses time, obviously that weakens his MVP case and relatively strengthens Curry's. And two, I was less enthused about this until the news came out that Kawhi Leonard was missing the entire preseason, because I felt that Kawhi is the odds-on favorite at full strength because of the strong regular season teams. He's the only one that is really the only star caliber player on his team, so that can always be a big help. And Kawhi's just awesome. So my thought was, kind of like if it's a close race between Kawhi and Durant and maybe Giannis, whoever else in that group, that Kawhi kind of gets the benefit of having weaker surrounding talent. And if he misses time, that could show how valuable he is, but generally that doesn't get rewarded. It's more how the team does. So if Kawhi's stance has gotten a little bit weaker, because also the Spurs, as everybody probably knows by this point, are incredibly judicious about the way that they approach players and rest and everything like that, then it starts to make his case harder. And for those who listen to the whole Dunked On podcast that Nate and I did on the MVP, one of the big components of his argument, or the argument I actually used against him, was not his quality of play, it was his quantity of play last year. And he was pretty healthy. The Spurs played him fewer minutes, and what Russ and Harden, and to a lesser degree LeBron, because LeBron had other stuff going on, those guys played a lot more, and that matters for value, and I think that matters to voters too, and it matters for counting stats and everything else, playing fewer minutes per game, playing in fewer games. So I think those arguments all hurt Kawhi. He still, I think, is the favorite, but he's less of a favorite than I thought he was. So for me, Curry at 14 to 18 to 1, especially if you can get it at 18, that is probably the best gamble you can make, in my opinion. And yeah, it's not like, oh, it's more likely than not or anything like that. But when you're getting 18 to 1, it doesn't have to be more likely than not. It just has to be a reasonable possibility. And Curry winning a third MVP absolutely is, especially when you consider the idea that a lot of people are thinking after the finals MVP and everything else, that this is Durant's team. So if Curry has that kind of a year, 14-15 or better, I think he has a very good chance at this. And I think there's a reasonable chance that happens. So those things all go together. Before leave the podcast, I want to take a little bit to talk about just a short bit about my heart going out to the people who've been affected by the fires throughout Northern California. I've been fortunate enough to travel through a lot of that area for various things in my life and to know people in a lot of these areas. And it happens, we like to think that we're empathetic and that, a tragedy anywhere really matters and affects us. And that's certainly true. But this has hit closer to home for me. I live in the North Bay, not as far north as this is affecting, but people just getting things taken away and so quickly. So my heart goes out to them, and my sincerest thanks to those of course, first responders, firefighters who are trying to mitigate this and trying to save lives, but also to those who took time to make people's lives better through donating, through giving their time in the last couple days. And so thank you to everybody who is doing so, who is selflessly giving of them whatever they can. And I'm not going to advocate for a charity or for anything else like that, but if you want to support it, you certainly can, and I would be thrilled if you did. So that's enough for right now. It is super exciting to be able to have this podcast off the ground. It has been in the works for a while, and I'm so thankful to CLNS and Nick Gelso to give me the freedom to really do this how I want. And so some people will probably find that frustrating that this isn't going to be a rock solid, like everyday type thing. But I just don't have the bandwidth to do that right now. And I also think that to the point that it is monetizable, that part is really hard just because it's so frequent. But I think you're really going to enjoy this. I think it's going to be a very different part in the space. And for those of you who are familiar with my work, you will know the way that I approach all this. It's going to be in depth. It's going to be covering what I think is important. And one of my overarching topics, and I talked about this a little bit in the intro, is that I like to focus on things that are not being covered in full other places. I'm very cognizant of the great Warriors coverage that is all around, including at The Athletic where I work, but everywhere. The Warriors are talked about a lot now on other podcasts, by other writers. And so I want to try to find things that you wouldn't necessarily get other places. And so that's the goal for this. Whether it comes to be or not entirely is up to that. And this flexibility makes it very important to give your feedback. So you can reach out through email, DannyLeroux@gmail.com. You can reach out on Twitter @DannyLeroux. Email's way better because you can take whatever time you want and things don't get lost in the shuffle. With Twitter, it certainly does happen. And if you take the time to write it, I will take the time to read it. That is my promise. I might not respond because committing to responding would give a lot more time for everything. But I do really appreciate that with this show. And of course, there are a lot of things you can do to support it. You can leave a rating, leave a review, always big with a new podcast. And you can subscribe and download every episode. Subscribing and downloading every episode is very important with this one in particular because there isn't going to be a reliable schedule. It's going to be when I see something needs to be done. There will be an episode at minimum every week, but sometimes it's going to be 2. Sometimes it might even be 3 with like a quick, if something happens, doing something like that, a 5-minute talking about something. It's going to be the fun of this format as I explore it is going to be doing a lot of different things at once. So spread the word also through whatever means you use to tell people about things. If it's in person, if it's just saying to your friends, hey, there's a new Warriors podcast, or, social media, Reddit, whatever you're going to use. I really do appreciate it. And I will, of course, be promoting it myself. And it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm so excited and energized by the possibility of doing what I want and being able to add something to this conversation. I'm mostly doing this as a passion project. I'm not expecting to make a ton of money on it or anything crazy like that. But I really loved talking about the Warriors regularly and talking candidly and really using this format and pushing it. And of course, you can read my work at The Athletic and everywhere else that is willing to publish it. But I like the audio medium for talking about basketball, and I like it for talking about this team in particular. So hopefully you do as well. You can, again, check out my writing at The Athletic. You can follow me on Twitter at Danny Leroux, DNNYLEROUX, and you can buy/pre-order my book, 100 Things Warriors Fans Should Know and Do Before They Die. It has a technical release date of November 1st, but for those who pre-ordered on Amazon, you're going to be getting it much earlier. I think my sister's copy is getting there on Wednesday, so you can check that out. I have my first copies. That was a very emotional experience. It's really cool to see it. I'm super proud of it, so you can check that out. It's through Triumph Publishing, and I will do something in the near future announcing on signed copies and events and all that kind of stuff. It's still being worked on, so it's not all the way done. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much to Anthony Slater for coming on the debut episode. Take care and make it a great day.